since Leonard said that I may tell you things that you already do and some that you didn't, I think we need to start with the quiz so I know what you know. But I'll forego that. You know, I met Morris, I guess it's, you know, nearly 30 years ago, just following the dedication of a plaque honoring City College faculty and students who died in the Spanish Civil War, at which I guess it was it Phil who got up? Yeah. Phil Fodor, Henry's brother Phil, got up and said to the assembled crowd, you know, had so-and-so not died on the front in Spain and come back, then he too would have been fired by the Rappuder committee, along with me, along with all of Henry's three brothers. Henry escaped by virtue of being a kid.
Not quite as kid.
No, they caught up with him afterwards. So, and the acting president of the college, I couldn't be there because I had child care responsibilities on that Sunday, but the next Monday morning, the acting president called and said there's something really important. I heard in my family the term Rappuder committee, and I knew that it meant something really disgusting, but I didn't know what it meant. And would you, you know, I'm going to be here for a year, maybe we can do something, we can find out about it. So, you know, I did some research and I did find out about it. I didn't know about it either because, you know, I didn't come from a leftist family and I didn't grow up in New York City, so somehow it escaped my attention as a youth. And shortly thereafter I met Morris, and you know, he was extraordinarily generous with his time and outgoing, and told me a lot that I needed to know in order to convince the faculty senate at the City College, you know, that this was their opportunity in 1980 and 81. It was 1980 actually, the fall of 1980. Actually it was earlier, it was the spring, the end of the spring of 1980, to try to make some amends by apologizing to the people who were fired. Nearly 50 lost their jobs at City alone, and to see whether we could convince the university-wide faculty senate and ultimately the board of trustees to issue an apology, and by the way, to promise not to do it again. Which they did. We succeeded in October.
Promises.
Promises.
There are students here who have no idea what the Rappuder is.
Right, I think about that, yeah.
Okay.
And they did that in October of 1981, and gave Morris an opportunity actually to read a lengthy statement into the board minutes, which was quite unusual. The Rappuder committee was a joint legislative committee named for Herbert Rapp of upstate Geneseo and Frederick Kudera, the Kudera and Kudera law firm, who was representing at that time the Czar, to investigate school finance in New York State, and by the way, along with school finance, also to look into allegations of subversion. Well, they forgot about the finance and looked into subversion primarily beginning at what were then called the municipal colleges. In 1938, some years before this, a disaffected formerly left-wing English professor at Brooklyn College named Gravanier complained to Martin Dice, the head of the newly created House Committee on Un-American Activities, that Brooklyn College was a nest of communists and that he should do something about it. So Dice comes to New York and talks to the chairman of the board, what was then called the Board of Higher Education, a fellow named Ordway Teague, who was a reform candidate put in by LaGuardia. And Teague said, famously, that the political affiliations of members of the teaching staff at City and Brooklyn were none of the board's business. And if there were communists, if there were people of many different stripes on the faculty, that was a sign of the healthy diversity of the faculty. Well, that was 1938, so he sent Dice packing. 1940, you know, the Depression sort of came back to haunt everybody. The Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact had been signed and substantially weakened the position of the left in American politics. And it was the year of, among other things, the Smith Acts were passed, and state legislatures around the country, there grew up what were known as little dies committees. And one of them, the one here in New York State, went by the name of Raffider. The idea was to try to root out subversion in schools, to enforce loyalty oaths on teachers, and to have fired, if they could, those people that they suspected of what was broadly seen as sedition, in their eyes anyway. The occasion for this one was the attempt of the City College Philosophy Department to appoint Bertrand Russell in 1940, and the Hearst Press and some leading churchmen in the city got wind of this, and particularly Bishop Manning of the Episcopal Church, and mounted a fierce and vitriolic campaign about this. Russell was described in the Hearst Press as the godless advocate of free love and communism. And actually, there were cartoons, there were wonderful cartoons of this. So I don't have slides today, but if you all come back to the town event on Thursday, I will, and I'll be happy to show you the cartoon showing Russell with you know, the ABCs of communism in one hand and an impressionable youth there, and something about you know, sex behind his back, and you know. So eventually LaGuardia caved into the pressure and just crossed out the line that would have supported his appointment in the city's budget by December. But the folks who were so angry that this had happened, how we're spending public money, you know, to subvert the morals of the children of New York City, and when we could be cutting taxes, you know, raised this in the New York State Legislature, and the result was the formation of the Raffider Committee, which got to work early in the winter of 1941. They began by subpoenaing the membership lists of the teachers union, both Local 5, the predecessor of my union, actually what was called the New York Teachers Union, one of the oldest in the country, and Local 537, the College Teachers Union, which was the predecessor of my union, the Professional Staff Congress. The union's lawyer tried to fight this in court, lost. They got the membership list, and they went down the list and called people who had been identified by one or another person. I actually found ultimately the typescript and manuscript of more than 800 names that they had compiled, along with the notation of where the people lived and who had denounced them and the nature of the denunciation. So you would see, for example, that Mr. So-and-so who taught social studies, somewhere was denounced by Mrs. Goldstein, whose son says that he's active in the teachers union. That was enough to get you on the list. They got mostly through the colleges, City College primarily, because there was so much grist for the mill. Before the Nazis interrupted the game by invading the Soviet Union, and that postponed things until the end of the war when they came back and got Henry in '46. And ultimately the chief investigator for the committee, a fellow named Robert Morris, who had gone to work for Naval Intelligence during the war, wound up as the chief investigator for the McCarran Committee. So when Pat McCarran of the Senate Committee on Internal Security began his purges in the early 1950s, the list of those people whom they hadn't gotten to in 1941 and 1942 came back. And so, for example,
Steve, let's go on to Morris, because we got a few minutes.
Well, okay, that's rapid here. Anyway, I'm interested in Morris in part as a teacher, a model faculty member at City, and as a union activist. So I have a little story that I wrote a few years ago. In March 1936, 29-year-old English instructor Morris Schappes was teaching a section of English 4 at City College, as he had for the past 8 years. He had assigned his students to read Percy Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy. The poem expressed Shelley's shock at news of the infamous Peterloo Massacre of 1819 in Manchester, England, when hundreds of men, women, and children peaceably demonstrating on a Sunday for parliamentary reform and the living wage were brutally dispersed by the local militia, with a number of demonstrators killed. Shelley concluded his ode with these expectant stanzas. And these words shall then become like oppression's thunder doom, ringing through each heart and brain, heard again and again, again. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. Morris's plan for the class, as he remembered when I interviewed him in 1981, was to show his students how the poet, in his words, as a human being, reacts to his world as a whole in correspondence and poetry and prose. He doesn't just go up to the bird loft. To make this point, he read from Shelley's essay, A Philosophical View of Reform, written a year after the Mass, but then lost for 100 years. As he was reading into his classroom, walked the English department chair, Professor Charles Francis Horn, a man whose sole claim to scholarly achievement was a history of the American Legion. This visit was the first in Morris's 8 years of teaching at City College. It was unannounced, which was unheard of at the time, and against union rules. Horn stayed in the class no more than 15 minutes. That afternoon, Morris was on his way to the college library at one end of Lincoln Carter, the principal thoroughfare in the college's main building, now known as Shepherd Hall, past the English department office, Shelley's essays in hand, when Horn spotted him and called him into his office. "What do you mean by reading Karl Marx?" Horn demanded. Morris tried to show him the text of A Philosophical View of Reform, but Horn turned his back on me and walked over to the window, and that was that. Far from being over, the story was just beginning. A few weeks later, at the start of his 9 a.m. class, Morris was handed a letter from Horn saying that he would not be reappointed for the fall term. Doubting that anyone else had been served with such a notice, Morris ran to the education department office during the 10 minutes between classes and asked one of our office workers, as he put it, to make copies of the letter as a leaflet for a noontime meeting of the college's fledgling union, the Instructional Staff Association. Then he learned that 12 others had also been fired. By 3 p.m. that day, students in the hundreds staged a protest outside the president's office in Lincoln Carter. Within a month, the dismissal of the City College 13, all of them activists in the union or the Anti-Fascist Association, had become a major issue in New York and beyond. Students knew and respected Morris and the others because, as Morris said, we liked the students and had a special orientation to them. We had common interests, Morris said, so that the students often turned to us and would be known, and you would be known to people who kept their ears open. That obviously was true. Morris was no stranger to the labor movement either. As a young communist, by the way, he said they didn't know what to do with the teachers in those days, so they sent him to City College, and he multiplied himself. He said that he was the only one at the time, so he said, well, I multiplied myself. As a young communist, he had lent a hand organizing the Transport Workers Union by leafleting conductors on the 6th and 9th Avenue L's from 23rd Street to the college campus. Morris remembered this as what he called a proletarian aspect of his activity, the kind the Communist Party no doubt encouraged because then it regarded academic activity to be insufficiently proletarian. As a consequence, labor activists like the TWU's Mike Quill knew Morris and the others, regarding them in Morris's sardonic phrase as, quote, not only intelligent intellectuals, close quote. At the 1936 May Day rally, reinstatement of the City College 13 was a major demand. A contingent of hundreds of faculty and students marched, with about 60 of the faculty members decked out in cap and gown, led by John Bridges, a classical languages professor at City. During the march, a mounted cop came trotting up and bent down to speak to Bridges. Morris later learned that the cop had been Bridges' student and had stopped to greet him. This apparently trivial incident, a mounted policeman greeting an academically bedecked marshal in the May Day rally, represents something about Morris's work and life at the time, a quality that resonates with progressive people of the baby boom generation. I think you probably don't want to listen to me go on and on about this. Obviously, the 13 by June of that year, the 13 had all been reinstated, and they lived to organize further. By the time the Rapid Committee hit, there were at least 100 members of the faculty and staff who belonged to the College Teachers Union, Local 537. At the time the committee began its hearings. including the first black faculty member hired at the college, Max Jurgen, who was one of the 50 who was let go. That had been a major aim, both of the left on the campus and, of course, of the Union and of Morris, to bring a black faculty member to the city. And it wasn't.
And he couldn't eat in the cafeteria.
And he couldn't. Morris and some of the other activists from the Union brought him to what was then the faculty dining room in the tower of Shepherd Hall, which in those days had waitress service, and they wouldn't serve him, so he just sat in until he was served. So he, in some sense, he segregated the faculty dining room at City College. So I think it shows. I mean, this set of stories shows what a model Morris was for people of my generation. And the pity of it is, of course, that for a generation or more, this kind of activism, both as a teacher, as a faculty member, as a trade unionist, and as a person on the left, was eliminated from City College. One of the three, there were only 3 people who testified who became stool pigeons for the committee. One of them was appointed dean and lasted until the time I got there in the late 1970s. And so you can just imagine the kind of lesson that this taught the younger people. If you want to hold on to your jobs and stay out of trouble, you know,
Being informed.
being informed, right, and you can get promoted. So in any event, if you have questions, I would be happy to answer them.
One question. Morris was the only one of the people that was fired that was actually in prison, is that right?
Yes, the story is that the committee began with secret hearings at which, if anybody had been denounced by at least 2 people, if there was a corroborating witness, you'd be summoned to a secret hearing. They China, like it was, like a Jack Webb FBI serial. They shine a light in your face and say, "Okay, son, now tell me, are you now or were you ever a member of the Communist Party?" and so forth. And the very next day, you were deprived of the right to have an attorney present with you. You were deprived of a transcript, and the next day, of course, the Hearst papers had it. It was in the Hearst papers. For those who refused to cooperate in the private hearings, the committee turned their names over to the Board of Higher Education, which by then had been persuaded to change its stance toward intellectual diversity and to pass a series of resolutions that described as conduct unbecoming a member of the staff anyone who refused to testify before any legislative investigating committee. And so as many people as had continuing appointments, tenured or something close to that, were then brought up on charges of conduct unbecoming before board trial committees and summarily dismissed. Now, Morris actually, following the advice of Morris Raphael Cohen, the famous philosopher, that you could tell the police the truth, but they wouldn't know what to do with it, thought that he had invented a way to take the pressure off of his colleagues and himself so that they could keep their jobs without being fired. And so he concocted a story that he would say that he had been a member of the party but had resigned to go back to graduate school in 1938, and that he only knew 3 other members of the party. 2 of them were killed on the front in Spain, and the 3rd resigned from the college and went off as an organizer in the Kentucky coalfields. Well, the police unfortunately did know what to do with this, and Thomas Dewey, who was then Attorney General of New York State, brought felony perjury charges against Morris. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 months to 2 years in prison, and did hard time in Dannemora, among other places. And so, so he was the only one. None of the other, the others were removed from their jobs, but that, wasn't against the law. It was against the, not yet. So that took them a while to accomplish that. In any event, thank you for your